Put on your crucifixes, malas, or pentacles, because this episode is all about the anthropology of religion. Welcome back to Anthropology in 10 or Less, your basement-based source for anthropological inquiry. I'm your host, Michael Kilman, and today we're going to explore part one of an anthropology of religion. Religion is one of those huge things. It's going to take a number of episodes to cover, but today we're going to focus on how anthropologists look at religion. A quick note before we dive in. Anthropology is not so concerned with whose religion is right or wrong. Mostly we're concerned with how religion relates to the rest of culture. So none of the following episodes on religion will be about that big word, truth. We'll simply explore the relationship between culture, religion, and the great deal of diversity within the human spiritual experience. So, I guess the first place to start is a definition. Yeah, I don't like that much either. Defining religion is problematic for a number of reasons, but let's give it a shot. 1. Religion is a unified set of beliefs or practices relative to sacred things, that is to say, set aside and forbidden. Beliefs and practices which unite into a single moral community called the church, all those who adhere to them. The main problem with this one is that it's a very westernized definition of religion. First of all, not all religions have a church or any kind of centralized authority structure. That's mostly world religions, and this definition pretty much ignores the thousands of other local-based religions that are out there. Definition 2. Religion is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations in men by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. Well, a big problem here is that you could actually fit capitalism or nationalism under this definition. Both things certainly seem to establish powerful and pervasive orders and use all kinds of symbols like flags and money and history to justify their claims. Both capitalism and nationalism are cultural constructs, but have an air of factuality, and they certainly both seem realistic, even though they only work because we agree they do. So this definition doesn't necessarily just describe religion. Third definition, belief in spiritual beings. And that one is really just too broad to be of any real use. What do you mean by belief or spiritual beings? Is this a spiritual being? What about this? What about money? Hell, I'd pray to the money tree if I thought it would work. To be quite honest, I don't even really like the term religion. It's woefully inaccurate for describing the great diversity of experience that humans have in their lives. The problem is that no singular definition is possible to define the wide range of spiritual experiences for humans. There's just too much variety. I mean, what do you do with the Walpurgi concept of Jukapra? A concept which roughly translates into the dreaming or the everyone? Or how about the term sunyata for Buddhism, which translates roughly to emptiness or voidness as the nature of reality? Or the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, the closest translating meaning non-action as a spiritual concept? We could spend a lot of time listing dozens of conceptions that don't exist anywhere in the Western religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and this is the fundamental issue when defining religion. There's enough diversity that we can't really pin it down. And it gets worse too because words and concepts like belief don't exist in all cultures and languages. In fact, the concept of belief comes from a very particular kind of religious experience, that of the world religion or the conversion experience. In many cultures around the world, spirituality is not separate from everyday life, or at least it's not something you can really choose to do or not do. It's just part of the wider experience. In fact, this is the case for much of the 370 million indigenous people in the world today, who participate in thousands of unique religions. I've said it in episode 2 on understanding culture. It is often the case that definitions aren't all that helpful if you really want to understand how complex the human experience is. So how then do we look at religion if definitions don't work? Well, we look at what a religion does and what kind of features they have. First, let's look at what religions do. There are 4 main things here. Of course, the degree to which a religion participates in each of these things varies, but to some degree they all seem to do it. 1. Explanation. A lot of times we think of religion as something that tries to explain the, quote, unknown. But that's not really always the case. Religions move far beyond the unknown and include why we do everyday things. They talk about not only where people have come from, but also where they are and where they're going. 2. Control. Religion not only offers an explanation for why things are the way they are, but it also suggests a variety of control mechanisms to maintain a, quote, pure society. It may also relate to our governmental bodies by telling us the king has a divine right to be there. But while we think of religion often as the opiate of the masses in a form of social control, actually religion controls us on a much more fundamental level. It helps to set the stage for morals and ethics. It reinforces what kind of behavior in society are acceptable and how we should interact with other people. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Most social control actually stems from norms and the status quo in society, and law isn't required to step in. Of course, religion isn't the only thing that does this in culture. In fact, all elements of culture working together to do this. In fact, it should be no surprise that historically, law and religion have a strong relationship. Even though in the United States we live in a secular society, many of our laws and ideas about the world come from religious traditions that have influenced us over the course of history. That's pretty clear when we look at the laws of things like the Jewish Torah, the Muslim Quran, or the Hindu Vedas, which spend a sizable portion of their page space laying out rules and morals to live by. Now, some might argue that religion is the ultimate parental figure, the big guy in the sky telling you what to do or not to do. But the problem there is that it only describes theistic religions, or religions with gods. There are tons of religions out there that do not have a higher being, or any kinds of gods at all. Not all religions have someone watching over you or telling your good and bad deeds. So describing religion as a kind of all-seeing eye doesn't really account for the great deal of diversity. That doesn't mean that it can't sometimes act that way, but again, this goes back to the difficulty of defining religion in the first place. 3. Legitimation. This is the justification of the established order of things. In other words, religion contributes significantly to the legitimacy of the structure of a particular society. Now, we already mentioned the divine right of kings, but also think about things like the Hindu caste system or the debate over gay marriage. Religion can create a kind of credibility or rationality for an established order, though it's not the only cultural practice that does this. Remember, culture is holistic. 4. Community. Another thing that religions do is create a kind of social cohesion. In fact, it's obvious to pretty much anyone that religions are really good at creating in-groups and out-groups. I was raised Catholic, and constantly I heard other Catholics criticizing other kinds of Christians and other Christians criticizing Catholics. But within groups, there's a lot of social cohesion. People oftentimes view religion in the same way they view their families. It doesn't matter if there are a dozen or a few million people. Sharing a religious practice can be a unifying factor for creating identity. Of course, it can also be divisive as well, and we'll do an entire episode in the near future on the relationship between violence and religion. A few other things that religions sometimes do. They sometimes keep time or mark important events on calendars, regulate eating habits, sexual habits, and cleanliness. They may also name important people or locations. Alright, so now that we are through some of the basic functions, let's talk a moment about some of the features of religion. 1. Cult. The term cult gets a bad rap, and we tend to think of evil cultists or abusive megalomaniacs that lead to the tragic events like those in Jonestown or Heaven's Gate. The truth is, every religion or spiritual practice has cult. Cult is quite simply the veneration and respect of an object, a person, a place, a supernatural entity, or something else. It's not of a question if your religion has cult, but how much. And by the way, the secular world has cults too. Sports fans, history buffs, and of course, this. 2. Language. These are the magic words, or rather the words and terms or ideas that are specific to the practice of religion. Some words, ideas, or symbols are considered sacred and meaningful. Some things, like prayer or spell casting, yes, those two things have very similar functions and are an attempt to change reality or appeal to a supernatural force to change things for you. Some practices, like a few schools of Buddhism, have sacred words or mantras that are said to invoke qualities that are already present within the person saying them. So it's not always about invoking supernatural beings, but there does tend to be an association with the relationship between words and power. 3. Rituals. Religion is performance, and going to church on Sunday is partaking in a ritual. Some of these rituals, like Native American sun dances, Muslims praying 5 times a day, or the ordination of a Catholic priest, are steeped in rules and ceremony that must be performed in a very specific way, while other rituals are more flexible and mobile, like those of non-denominational Christians or neo-pagans. Their rituals are not necessarily set by some kind of centralizing body or tradition. Also, there are many kinds of rituals out there, and this will be the subject of another episode of the Anthropology of Religion. The core thing to remember here is that ritual is a performance of religion. All those ancient myths and creation stories that we read about in books were very often performed in a ritual. Finally, anthropologists ask a number of other questions about religion. For example, just how diverse are religions? What's the relationship between religion and gender, race, class, politics, and economics? Basically, how does the religion fit into the wider picture of culture? Ultimately, what we're interested in here is how religion both structures people's lives and impacts their individual and community experiences. But that's all for this episode of Anthropology in 10 or Less. We'll see you next time. Real quick though before you go, consider taking a trip over to our Patreon page and becoming a contributor to the show. We'd absolutely love to get more episodes up faster, but it's just not possible without support. Plus, for supporters, there are perks. So head over there and check it out. Thanks.